So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Casey Hall, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Hannah Fieldsend and Tom Blake. And in this lesson, we're going to be looking at how geographic technology is applied in the real world. So how it's used to respond to natural disasters like hurricanes, and how it's used to look after different ecosystems all around the planet. And in this first section, I'm going to be talking about why it is geographers bother to collect and analyse and share data about our planet and its people. And to do this, we use a geographic technology that's known as GIS. So Hannah, Tom and I all work for a company called Esri UK that makes GIS software. So that's a company that makes computer programs that help us collect, analyse and share data. First of all then, I want to give you all a bit more information about what a GIS is. So GIS stands for Geographical Information Systems, and in a moment we're going to play a very short video that just explains a little bit more about this technology. And before we click start on it though, as you're watching this video, it's going to be helpful if you just make some brief notes on what a geographical information system is and what kinds of decisions GIS help us make. So you can use the notes grid that I sent out, or the back of your book, or wherever your class teacher usually tells you to make notes, to just jot that down. So if I can hand that on over to you to just share the screen and play the video.
All right, let me go for it. Let me see if I can make this work. I'm going to share my screen too. Share. You should be able to see that now. Let me just make sure we can hear. Share computer sound.
Lovely stuff. If you don't mind popping the subtitles on as well, that would be great.
GIS stands for Geographic Information System. Using computer hardware, software, and a ton of raw data, we can explore the fundamental principle of geography, that location is important in people's lives. Using GIS, we can view, understand, question, visualize, and interpret data in visual ways that reveal relationships and patterns, which allows us to make better decisions. For example, a meteorologist might study the paths of hurricanes to predict where and when they might occur in the future. A city planner can choose the best location for a new park or hospital, ensuring that they are built in the place where they're needed the most. GIS is essential to understanding what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen in geographic space. Geographic understanding brings wisdom, and with wisdom, we can make better decisions to create a brighter future.
Fantastic. Right, so let me.
I got a little bit of a lag on my sound there. So in case anybody else did as well, I'm just going to kind of run through a little bit of what was covered in that video just now, and we'll also make sure that we share that link so that you can watch it again if you need to in your own classrooms. But fundamentally, what that video is telling us is that GIS is a tool that we use to help us understand data. It lets us show data in visual ways and understand what has happened, what is happening right now, and it's going to be used to predict what will happen in the future as well. Oh, mine's now trying to play. So in that video, we saw that GIS was being used to predict hurricanes and to plan where to build things. But what else can we do with GIS? The answer is you can do pretty much anything that you can imagine. And we're going to go through some of those uses in this lesson today. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is how GIS can be used to monitor earthquakes. So this is the Earthquake Watch dashboard. And again, we'll make sure that you've got access to the link so you can explore this yourself if you want to in your own time or with your classes. This dashboard is telling us about where different earthquakes have happened and what effects they've had. So we can see over here, this one was relatively small magnitude earthquake. They haven't had to issue a tsunami warning because it's relatively far away from the coast. And this map works because a global network of seismometers, so that's sensors that measure movement of the Earth's surface, feed live data into the map. So people who are using this dashboard can straight away see a new earthquake has taken place. They can see how powerful it was, and they can see how close it is to where people live. And from that, they can make an assessment, how dangerous is this earthquake actually going to be? Do we need to warn people about the potential for secondary effects like those tsunamis? Scientists also access this data to look for patterns. So are there warning signs that emerge that an area may be at particular risk? Do we see lots of little earthquakes, for example, before there's a major slippage on a particular fault line? Can we help plan, prepare, or even prevent a disaster from occurring by having this data kind of available to us that we can look at as and when we need to? This next photo was taken in Puerto Rico about a month after Hurricane Maria passed through. So another use of GIS here is all to do with hurricanes as a hazard. So you probably already know that GIS is widely used to monitor the development of tropical storms and hurricanes. So in that case, we use satellite imagery. So we take photographs of the storm systems from space as they're starting to develop to understand how it is that they're going to grow and move. Data might also be gathered by buoys out to sea or by planes and drones that fly directly into the storms to take measurements. So GIS plays this key role in helping us understand how hurricanes are formed, as we can feed all of that data into the GIS system to really understand their development. Once they have formed, GIS lets us track and predict the future path of storms. And the maps that we make to show this are really important to help people understand what is likely to happen and what they need to do to keep themselves safe. So are they going to be able to weather that storm in place, or do they need to evacuate? If they are evacuating, how far away are they going to need to move in order to be safe? Now, Hurricane Maria was a particularly devastating storm. Disaster relief experts have classified it as a catastrophic event, and that means that almost all of the built environment was destroyed. So people couldn't move around the island because the roads had simply been wiped away. Supplies that had been put in place before the disaster took place had been destroyed by the storm. And that made disaster response much more difficult for Maria compared to earlier hurricanes that season like Irma and Harvey, which had struck the US mainland a few weeks beforehand. So Irma and Harvey left most of the built environment standing, and they were able to position supplies well inland that were still available after those storms had passed by. And there's also a bit of a political issue around Hurricane Maria. Tensions erupted between the federal and the local government, so between the government in the mainland USA and the local mayor and the other leaders kind of on the islands. Because Puerto Rico was in debt to the federal government, unlike Florida and Texas, they didn't sort of have cash that they could immediately pay to get relief from sort of the main US government. So that caused a bit of an issue in getting relief out there. So it was a very complicated situation, and at a political level, it was difficult for them to get aid, particularly in the first kind of few moments after the disaster. But there were lots of people who did want to help, and there were people who were keen to support each other on the ground in Puerto Rico as well. So as well as modelling and predicting hurricanes, another use of GIS is to make it easier for people who need it to get help. So even in an emergency situation, most people evacuate with their mobile phone still in their pocket. We all carry them everywhere these days. And they may still have access to the internet and be able to get on social media, even as the storm is kind of passing through, if they're kind of connected to satellites, for example. And GIS can take this data direct from things like Twitter and Facebook and use it to map where people are tweeting from, where they're updating their status from. So people who need help urgently can tweet about it, and then the aid agencies can use the map of where those people were tweeting from to go and help them. And those aid agencies could also add additional information to the same map as they're moving around the island. So they can show where the roads have washed away, and they can show where people can go and get food and water for themselves, so they can start to help themselves in this instance as well. They also can record when they've responded to an issue, so you don't have multiple aid agencies that are all responding to the same call for help twice and wasting effort. So hopefully you can see on my screen now, this is the actual app, and this has been archived. So if you are using Hurricane Maria as a case study, all of this information you can go and explore for yourself in your own time. If I just click on one of the little icons here, so these little red icons are where people are asking for help, we can see they've got no drinking water, possible means drinking water, and that this came from Twitter. It was somebody tweeting, please help, we've got no water here, reported by the locals. And then when they've addressed these issues, you can see these little white icons. So here they've put drinkable running water in, they've put that onto Facebook so that people are aware of it, and they're also reporting it here on this dashboard so that people can find it for themselves and go and access it if they need to do that for themselves. So that's kind of a use of GIS as a way to kind of help people when they're in need after a disaster has taken place. Another use of GIS is to help us manage and understand different ecosystems. So this app that we're looking at now is showing us where different ecosystems are found all around the world. So we can see here, I've clicked on the UK and it's showing where the kind of cool wet bioclimate is, where other places that are kind of quite flat, like where I've clicked on the UK is, and where places have the same rock type and land cover as well. So data about climate and geology and landforms and what people are using the land for are all collected together. And this helps us understand where particular ecosystems are located. So all of the places that are marked in red on this map over here are basically the same sort of ecosystem as this one here in the UK. And we can use that to make decisions about what the best course of action is to manage habitat in those particular regions. And we can find rare habitats and make decisions about how to protect them properly, for example, using these maps. But there's another use of this ecosystem data that you might not realise is actually another example of GIS. And that is that GIS is widely used in films and computer games. So this is a still from the movie Zootopia, or it was called Zootopia in some parts of the world. And Disney had this concept of a world where humans had never existed and where animals behave in a modern human way. And they wanted their city to feel believable as well as look fantastic. So you can find lots of gorgeous pieces of concept art demonstrating what this was going to look like that their designers have produced. But when it comes to the film itself, they need technology to rapidly build this world. You know, they've got a film to make, they've got a story to tell, and they can't hand draw and design from scratch everything in time to make that. Disney had already used a GIS program called City Engine to help build the city of San Francisco for Big Hero 6. So in that example, they took real-world data from the city of San Francisco and they applied Japanese design concepts to the model so they could really rapidly build this hybrid city. Zootopia was an even bigger challenge because it had to be built from scratch and it had to accommodate that multi-scale architecture set inside different ecosystems. So they used GIS to generate the world for them. They designed building types and landscape surfaces that were inspired by real places and geographies, but that mice and elephants might be capable of using at the same time. They then set up the rules for how these buildings and landscapes could interact with each other in space, and they let the computer generate the world for them. And lots of computer games do the same thing. So if you've played things like Horizon Zero Dawn or Skyrim or The Witcher, you've probably noticed how the landscapes kind of change in realistic ways as you explore those worlds. And the Witcher TV series on Netflix also used GIS to build their CGI landscapes for all those establishing shots when they're kind of moving into different landscapes. So the point I want to make here is, as well as kind of gathering data for sort of governmental response and for kind of charities to work with, GIS has also been used in a big way by creative industries. And it comes back to that idea of whatever you can imagine, you can probably use GIS successfully for. And I hope that now you've seen some examples of what you can do with the GIS, you might be wondering, well, how do I get from where I am now, kind of potentially thinking about GCSE or A-level geography in my classroom, to working on these kind of projects where I can help people recover from disasters, you know, do science on disaster data, or make these kind of amazing sort of visual resources for games and TV shows. And that's where I'm going to invite my colleagues Hannah and Tom to talk a little bit about their GIS journeys. So Hannah, are you still there on the call?
Yep.
Awesome stuff. Do you want to start to take people through your particular GIS journey?
Yeah, of course. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Hannah, and I've worked at Esri UK for just over a year now. But originally, as it says on the slide there, I'm from a rural background. So I'm from a tiny village in northeast Lincolnshire. And that's where my interest in the environment and the outdoors really came from. So that kind of sparked my interest to study geography at Gcse. So I chose to study geography, and then from there really enjoyed it and went on to study geography at A-level. But I also really enjoyed some of the topics that Katie was talking about there, so ecology and ecosystems, and that comes with biology. So I was between the two, but luckily they both cross over quite a lot in the ecosystem space. So I studied geography, biology and English, And then I went on to study geography at university. That's what I chose to do because I chose to study a topic that I really enjoyed. So originally when I went to university, I moved to Edinburgh, so quite a long way from where I am at the minute. And I wanted to study volcanoes. I wanted to be a volcanologist. So that picture on the right, I wanted to be that person in the hard hat. I thought they were so exciting. But when it got down to it, the chemistry side didn't really interest me that much. So I ended up taking a whole range of different courses to try and find something to narrow my focus down into. And that's when I just by chance took a course in GIS. So I'd never heard about it at school. It didn't get brought up in my GCSE or my A-level. The first time I heard about GIS was at university. It turns out I really enjoyed it. As Katie said there, we kind of got a flavour for all of the different things that it included. I thought it was just scientific, but it wasn't. It works across so many different industries, and there's loads of different jobs to do with it that I had no idea were there when I chose to study geography. So in my third year at university, I applied for lots of internships to try and get some good work experience in the industry. And I got through to a lot of interview stages, but I was never successful. It was a massive confidence knock for me, and it made me not want to apply anymore. But I kind of took a break from applying, tried to remember why I was studying this in the first place. It's because I really enjoyed it. So instead, I put my energy into volunteering and taking different opportunities that I could. And that's when I started working for the Royal Scottish Geographic Society. So that's what that RSGS logo is there. And this is a charitable organisation that promotes geography and anyone that's interested in it. And I used to help out. They had a series of inspiring people talks. So we had speakers from directors of Blue Planet and big explorers and TV personalities, and they would come and they would tour across the UK and give talks. So I helped out with that, just like selling the tickets and promoting the event. And I got to speak to some of these people as well. And it was really interesting, and I'm really grateful for my time there. So whilst I was volunteering for the RSGS, I met someone that worked at Esri UK, where I work now, and they told me about the graduate scheme. So I took a chance and applied for that, got through the interview stages, and that's where I am now. So both Tom and I are on Esri UK's graduate scheme, which is a 2-year programme where you rotate into different departments and aspects, experience lots of different aspects of GIS, both from behind the scenes and also using the software as well. So here we've got 2 examples of projects that I've worked on over the last year. So on the left there is some maps that we developed recently. So I was involved in a webinar, which is kind of like a long presentation to a bigger audience. So there were a couple of hundred people watching, and we were trying to demonstrate our software and how it can be used for emergency response, as Katie was talking about there. But specifically, our case study was the California wildfires. So we use satellite imagery, and we take the data from that and use it in our platform to detect these thermal hotspots. And from there, you can create maps for public safety and to inform local government response. But also on the top there, it's kind of a slide across map where you can see before and after a wildfire has devastated a region. And these maps are being used by insurance companies so that they don't have to risk their employees' safety by visiting the sites. They can just use this satellite data, create a map and see the damage for themselves, and then create insurance claims from that. And then on the right is a project that I got involved with, looking at solar farms and making a map to show suitability across the UK. So we looked at things like conservation areas. You don't want them there. They need to be close to some roads, but not close to people. And we took things like solar radiation into account. And that's a map that I developed there for a renewable company in the UK. So that's kind of what I've been doing over the last year with GIS.
Thank you so much for that, Hannah. That's really great to see.
Okay.
Tom, can I ask you to tell us a little bit more about your GIS journey as well?
Yep, no worries. So similarly to Hannah, I was never that sure of where I wanted to go when I was actually at school. So when I was at secondary school, I did a lot of different things, but not sure where to go. So I decided to follow what I enjoyed, which was kind of learning how the world worked. So at my A levels, I took geography, physics, and maths, but I also did an AS in photography, which was I enjoyed taking landscape photography at the time, so it was kind of another way of expanding on that interest of mine. And while doing my AS, I learned more about how the world worked and that kind of stuff, and it carried to interest me. So I continued that into my university days. So I went to Keele University and I was there for 4 years, 3 years for my undergraduate and a further year for my master's. And during that time, I was studying geography and geology. So again, I was interested in how kind of like Earth systems worked and how the environment was managed and changed over time. So I got to spend a lot of time doing that. And similarly to Hannah, this is where I learnt about GIS. Before I came to uni, I wasn't that well aware of it. So it was a great way for me to learn more about the software and understand how it worked. And it led me to do both my undergraduate and my master's kind of final project looking at GIS. So I spent time looking at I'm quite environmentally conscious. I find myself quite environmentally conscious. So my undergraduate was looking at cycling, as I cycle a lot myself. So I was looking at, are people more likely to cycle depending on the terrain of their local where they live. So seeing if people in steeper areas were less likely to cycle and for what reasons they would cycle in those areas. And for my master's, I was looking at river restoration. So looking at people that were returning rivers back to a more natural state after they'd been straightened due to building works. And it was quite interesting to see how GIS could be used to gather more information about those kind of projects, from taking existing data or looking at older data such as old maps to find out previously unknown data. While I was at Keele, I was very lucky that I managed to do 2 internships over kind of like my 3rd year and my 4th year, both in kind of slightly different but related ideas to do with drones. So my first one, I was able to look at emissions, or how like gas being emitted from landfills, and looking at drones to kind of measure the amount of gases that are being expelled and what impact they could have. And my second one was looking at, again, back at rivers, but looking at river defenses and seeing how using drones to try and see how the rivers have changed over time and seeing if they've been damaged. And very interestingly, I was able to look at machine learning, which is a very interesting and complex topic of kind of teaching computers information and getting them to work out things for themselves. And those kind of skills that I learned from those internships, I was able to pass on, and I've carried on doing some stuff like machine learning since then. From there, I was able to do my graduate scheme, like Hannah, where I've been at Esri for a year now, and I've been able to rotate between a whole bunch of different departments. And as we see here, I've kind of taken some of the info that I learned from my university days and carried it through. So I've done some work with machine learning while at Esri as well. So the images on the left, drone imagery, was kind of what I started with, but I've carried on to do some look at the machine learning tools in ArcGIS software to see what it's like and how it works, and it's been very interesting. But I've also been able to do some other stuff as well. So similarly to the emissions for landfills, I was able to write a blog about how we can use our software to look at emissions specifically over the last few months, where people's living styles have changed quite a bit. So it was quite interesting to see how emissions have changed in those time periods. But it was also quite a happy time for me because I managed to write the blog, and it was also picked up by colleagues in Spain who offered to translate it for me and put it onto their own website. So it was very interesting to see how what we do at Esri isn't just for our own country. It gets kind of shared around with other partners across the world. So it was a very interesting and eye-opening experience to see that happen for me. So that's some of what I've been doing leading up to Esri UK and while at Esri UK as well.
Thanks so much for that, Tom. I really like that point about how kind of, even though we're working based on sort of UK materials, a lot of it can kind of travel globally and people use it all over the world. So that sort of brings us to the end of our presentation part of today's lesson, and we've just got 5 or so minutes now for any questions that you folks have about what it is that we do, or how it is that you get into the GIS industry and kind of use this geographic technology in a real world context. So I think if your teachers want to put questions into the Q&A box, then we should be able to see those and answer those as well.
Got a question for Hannah. Will you pursue being a volcanologist in the future?
I think my lack of interest in geology will hinder me there, but it's definitely something that I'm interested in, and I'll keep an eye out on maps and everything GIS related to volcanoes, but it's not something I'm going to pursue, I don't think.
And I have to say that there's in that presentation, there's a lot that I've learned today in that presentation. There's so much information. And there's a question for Katie. Why did Esri UK choose to be in Aylesbury?
So Esri UK is based in Aylesbury because historically that's where the company kind of grew up from. So one of the original owners of the company lived in Aylesbury, and so that is why their HQ is there still today, even though we're sort of connected globally and we have other offices in Cambridge and Edinburgh as well. Aylesbury is kind of where it all started, and so that is why the HQ is where it is.
What other questions
So
have
what
we
we'll
got?
say, folks,
No, go for it, Katie, go on. Go for it.
No, I was just going to say, if there's any sort of if you're kind of watching this on the recording afterwards and you're interested in finding out more about some of the other careers in GIS or kind of getting links to the resources that we've shown today, we'll make sure that we share these so that you can have access to them in the future as well. So we have a question about what GCSEs do you need? So fundamentally, because GIS is so broad, I would say a lot of your different GCSEs are going to be relevant depending on what part of GIS you want to go into. So if you're somebody that wants to do computer game design, then it's going to be, making sure that you do your computer science and keeping up with things like art, if that's going to be part of what you want to do. But the key one, the fundamental one, is going to be geography, keeping up with geography both at GCSE and A level. So keep on with your geography. That's the main message there for GCSEs. And does Esri UK offer apprenticeships? We tend to do internships more than apprenticeships, but if it's something that you're interested in, if you can get your sort of teacher to contact our office, then we can kind of let you know the different levels of kind of work experience, internships, and any potential apprenticeships that are available. So that's just kind of get in touch with us and we'll let you know what's happening.
That's really useful to know, actually, because internships and work experience is really valuable. They can lead on to a lot of things. And for any students out there who are wondering, actually, is this something I want to go into? Is this something I want to use? I mean, I think you've seen from the presentation the breadth of things that you can do with geography, which I didn't even know about. And those internships and work experiences are great for you to be able to find out more about an area like this one, and to understand more about whether you'd like it or not. But also thinking about your future, there is nothing wrong with doing a work experience or an internship in these areas, because there's a lot of transferable skills that you will use across different sectors. And you've heard from Tom and Hannah about how their careers have gone and what they do and what they enjoy, and what they've learned from it. So those opportunities if those opportunities are there, follow up on them and find out, because they're really, really useful, especially the fact that they're in your area, which is really good.
If you don't mind, I would like to add to that as you go through like both A levels and university and anywhere else in school, just keep asking around to see if there are any opportunities available, because the internships that I did were both provided by my university. They're both things that they have a scheme that goes on that they try to connect with local businesses to look at kind of innovative new technologies and the like. So the best thing you can do to try and get experience is just to keep asking around at people who are helping you learn and see if they know anything else as well, because there might just be opportunities right on your doorstep to help you.
Perfect. It is 2:15, and I'm going to have to say thank you very much to Esri and Katie, Hannah, and Tom for presenting and speaking today. That's been really useful, and thank you also to all of the teachers that have brought their students, and for students that have had questions. The recordings will be available later on, and like we said, if you've got any more questions, send them in to Katie, because she will answer them as well. So yes, thank you very much, everybody.